The following is a conversation with Anthony McNeil. Anthony is someone who spent decades in the sports industry transforming the way we think about youth sports, community engagement, and leadership. He's the president and co-founder of Premier Sports Leagues, an innovative franchise that's reshaping youth athletics in Canada by fostering on lesser-known but highly engaging sports like futsal. Anthony's approach is all about inclusivity, accessibility, and ensuring every kid finds a space where they can belong. This is Pre-Zero Sports Talk podcast, and I'm your host, Sid Bensalah. Let's dive into this journey of redefining youth sports, one community at a time. Let's get started. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Hi, Sid. Great to be on the show.
You grew up in Labrador, a small, tight-knit mining town that seems like it had a big impact on shaping who you are today. Let's start with that. What was it like growing up there?
As a kid, 3 months old when I moved there, up until I left when I was around 18, 19 years old, it was a great environment. It was a small-knit community. It was a mining town. You were just another kind of family member amongst a number of families, but everybody did everything together. It just seemed like, when the parades would come, the whole town showed up. When there'd be something exciting happen to the town, everybody talked about it. When there's something sad, everybody felt it. So lots of great foundational type of upbringing. And of course, sports, where, one of the things, because the town was so new, it was only incorporated in 1960, and I was there in 1964, the mining company essentially subsidized everything. So it was never a question of whether you can afford sports. You did as many sports as you could, and you played as many activities as you could, and you interacted with whatever was happening in the town. So a great foundation for me as a child, and great friendships, even to this day. As a matter of fact, there's about 8 or 9 of us that every year we get together, and we've been doing it for over 40 years, stemming from that small community.
Yeah. And how big the community is?
I think at its peak when I was there, it's around 10,000 people, plus or minus. It's significantly less now, but in its heyday, it was probably about that number, yeah.
Yeah. And Anthony, how did being part of a small town impact your approach to team sports and the values you carry today?
I think I just recognized them as I got into the sports business, but they were there the whole time. One of the things is that when you get involved with sports, when we did in the small town back then, there was no scouts coming up to handpick people and take them on to the next level. Very seldom did parents ever show up to the facility. We grabbed our gear and went, whether it was playing hockey or playing basketball or whatever sport. I probably played about a dozen of them. So it was very much, you just learn to learn during the sport. Like you learned, how to meet new people when you first were on the team, and you learned how to find a role on the team. You learned the sport, obviously, that's goes without saying, but then you learned how to become better on your own. Maybe once in a blue moon, we'd have a special guest that would come into the town and put on a big type of clinic, but most of it was just sheer grit, sheer resilience, just pushing through and learning. And, again, a small town back then, the good players play with the not so good players. There was never any kind of division of players. So you were almost forced to a certain degree to step up to the level you could step up at the time without kind of being sectioned or segregated off into a certain level of play. So I think all those things just eventually contributed to my ability to cope, to get out there, to push forward, to try new things, be motivated, to be self-disciplined. A lot of skill sets that I've subsequently carried out of the little community of Labrador City, but didn't recognize it so much so until I got into this sports business and realized how beneficial the sports were. Because now I'm seeing it happen to the kids today that I was 40 years ago.
Yeah. Is there a specific moment from your childhood that still resonates with you, something that made you think sports can be more than just a game?
Gosh, it's a really good question. I think the biggest thing was the friendships I made. You go into a sport as an individual, either in an individual sport or as an individual on a team. And, as you play with your teammates, you get to know them. And I think the biggest impact was that I started to hang out with other guys on my team. And we did things together, and maybe we didn't travel in the same cliques within the town, but when we did get together somewhere, we recognized each other, and there was that kind of instant common bond. You both played sports. And a matter of fact, I referenced earlier about a group of guys we still get together. Much of that came as a result of playing sports with those guys that I think otherwise I probably would never have gotten to know as long as I've known them. So I think friendships, there's a lot of kind of internal skills that you develop, but I have to say that the biggest thing would be friendships that I probably recognized early. The skills were more things I recognized, as I said earlier, when I got into the sport. But I think I just found a tribe, so to speak, in the sports.
Yeah. You mentioned that floorball came into your life almost by accident through your son's interest, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Sometimes life takes us in unexpected directions that make perfect sense later on. Anthony, what moment did you realize floorball was more than just a new game for your son?
Yeah, no, I think there was one specific turning point. I always loved to be involved with my son in his sports. And when he found the sport, and I bought the equipment, and next thing that I'm getting schools starting to ask me for some of this equipment because it was a novel sport. And within my network, I started bringing it out to some of the schools and minor hockey associations. But the real kind of what I'll call a TSN turning point for me was that I had gone into a school and did a lunch program with a bunch of kids. And the phys ed teacher went to lunch, and I managed the students. And they were young students. They were probably 10, 11 years old. And there was one particular child in there that had some behavioral issues. I would say maybe it was like autism, or I couldn't quite, I wasn't versed in that. And some of the other kids kind of were picking on him a little bit. So I set the tone pretty early. Being a hockey coach and a referee, I was somewhat comfortable and familiar with managing kids and the environment. And I'd say, and so that was just a lunch program that kind of just, it came and went. It was 8 weeks. And about 4 or 5 months later, when we started our leagues in a community like literally on the other side of the city, which is about a 40-minute drive from the school. Anyway, I got a call from a parent who said their child would like to come out and play, and could he play in nets, and that his dad was an ice hockey goalie, and he wanted to be a goalie as well. But and I was like, yeah, sure. We've already started our league, but one of the philosophies I have is every kid should be able to play the sport, and you make those accommodations where and when you can, right? And so I went to one of the coaches who at the time was he had a good position in the minor hockey association. He really bought into the sport. He could see the sport being used to develop his kids. And he had a really good kind of group of kids that were all kind of great hockey players almost at the highest level of their age bracket. And he said, yeah, just bring them out and we'll put them in the nets, give them a try. So I called the mom back and I said, yeah, come on out. And so the following week she came out, and sure enough, when she walked through the gym door, it was the mom of this child that I had at the school that had some issues, right? Some disabilities. And I just went over and I met him. He was excited to see me. He was excited to be there. So we geared him up and we put him in the nets. And sure enough, every shot that went on the net pretty much scored. And then there was that situation where you have it all sports where you're looking at these other 11 and 12-year-old kind of really good hockey players starting to get down, starting to chirp, starting to wonder why we're putting a goalie in. They're not winning the game, again, because that's essentially the culture that they came from when they played hockey. And the other gentleman, Chris was his name, the coach, he did a great job because I was refereeing the game and managing the time clock and everything, and he did a great job containing them. So the game ended, I think, 14-1 or something like that. It was a blowout. But you know what? We had invited the child out, and he played, and then he was getting undressed, and his mom was so thankful that he got to play in nets in that way. So the coach came over, Chris, and he said, hey, how would you like to come back next week and play again? And of course, there was a moment of, okay, I'm looking at the mom. The mom was advising her son just couldn't stop the ball at any case. And of course, he was excited. He said, yeah, I'd love to come back. And so there was that kind of moment we're all looking at each other. And so I said, okay, here, I'm going to send you some videos. And they were goaltender training videos produced by Salming. And I said, just study the videos, and next week come back and we'll pick up where we left off. Just kind of left it. I turned to Chris. I said, you sure you want to do this, the coach? And he said, yeah, this is what we're all about. And I said, I agree. Anyway, following week he came back. They were warming up, and I noticed he was sliding over the proper slide that you're supposed to, the technique. He was coming out. He was lifting his hands. And I said, you know what? I'd be darned. He watched those videos. And I said, this is really neat. So we got to play the game again, and I think they lost like 4-2 or something. He stopped like well over half the shots. And the kids were kind of like, at first, obviously, he shows up and they're thinking it's another loss. And so the game ended. It was less of a defeat. And so one of the traditions in floorball is that after you finish, the teams come up shoulder to shoulder, face each other in 2 lines, and a captain is generally picked, and the captain steps forward, lifts their stick almost like as if to salute the other team, and of course their teammates lift their stick to salute, and then the captain gives a compliment to the other team. It's a sportsmanship. It's a kind of a final kind of tradition. And so I just said to the kids, I said, okay, kids, pick a captain and send them up to the front of the line, and they all picked this goalie.
Wow.
And so when he stepped out, he like I said, he wasn't the most fluent speaker. He was, what came out of his mouth, I still get goosebumps. Just the authenticity of his thanking and the gratitude for being there and the compliment paid was just authentic. Of course, I had tears in my eyes. The coach had tears in his eyes. The kids on his team now felt what it meant to be included in sport, right? And they made the decision. We didn't.
Yeah.
And to me, that was the moment I said, you know what? This is what defines sport right here. Now, if I could package that and organize it and allow what the kids learned in those 2 weeks to be learned by other kids in a sport that's fun and easy to play, I said, to me, that would be something I would just have great pleasure in doing.
What a great story, Anthony. And once again, that shows the power of sport, of uniting, of doing great things and giving opportunity to everyone. And this is such a fantastic story. Thanks for sharing, Anthony.
Yeah.
You choose franchising as a model for premier sports leagues. That's not something you see daily in youth sports, and it's quite a bold move. Why franchising, Anthony?
Well, it kind of didn't start out as franchising. It just started out as me doing my own thing. Schools asking me to where kids can go play after I went into it and then did the school workshop. And when I started setting up leagues, I started to realize that, because I had another business and this was a side thing. And I started to realize that, hey, there's a lot involved with setting up a league. It's not just rent a gym, hand out some pennies or T-shirts and referee the game. On the surface, it looks that easy. But when you get into safety and policies and insurance, and anyway, the list goes on, I recognize that, wow, there's a lot to putting off one of these. And that probably the best thing I can do is I could make a checklist, make sure that everything follows the same process, so that every week, at the very least, we're doing the same thing, or at the very least, I've ordered my insurance in time, right? Or I put the training out on time. My referees are trained before they should actually show up. So there was a bunch of checks and balances that I wanted to make sure I had in place. So what had happened is that I started to standardize it. And I had a great couple. They wanted to kind of, in the community across the water, they wanted to run this. And I said, hey, good, you go over there, do that. Here's a few checklists. And I got them the equipment. And probably about a month or so later, I popped in, and things they weren't as exactly like ours. Some of the rules were different. Maybe they weren't enforced. Maybe there was just a few things, a few nuances that were slipping. And I take myself back to my early business days when I was 25 years old. The very first business I purchased was a franchise. And I realized at that moment that if I'm going to open more and more communities, I need to standardize it and put better training in place and make sure that no matter where you play the sport, not only are all the operational issues the same, but certainly all the values are integrated into the sport. All the the purpose and all the everything that's required to make sure that we have those moments of value. And so that it just dawned on me that in order to do that, in order to standardize it, franchising was a way. It's franchising serves two purposes. It standardizes. There's a methodology that everybody does things very much the same with a few regional differences, but it also sets itself up for a good scalable business platform. And so my first intention was just to set up so that it's systemized, that maybe I could open operations in different locations. But then as I started to go down deeper into the franchise world and see what was involved with that and creating it, I felt that maybe there was even a bigger and better opportunity to scale the business through franchising. And in doing so, ultimately reach more and more kids with the values that came out of that original moment.
Yeah, yeah. Because just for the listeners to simplify and give them, let's say, a quite specific picture about what we're talking about, 99% of youth sports is organized and managed by volunteer, depend on which community you are. What is difficult, unless you have someone, he or she, that can organize and lead and get things done within the volunteer, because people are giving their time to support the youngsters and the youth sports. Sometimes it's quite hard to get them to commit in a sort of organizations where there is accountability, there is a schedule and things like that. Now, your model is straightforward. How do you manage to, let's say, get this kind of volunteering led sports, which most of the time lack structure? How do you get them to adhere to your vision, the way things should be organized for a better outcome?
Simple answer with a little bit of explanation. It just boils down to ownership. And the one thing that many of the volunteers in the community-based volunteer-run organization that you alluded to, their ownership is fractional. Their ownership is there while they're doing what they have to do, but they have many more things on their plate to do. And so they're not 100% in. What I mean by that is that they haven't really committed to taking full accountability and responsibility, because it's a volunteer position that A, they could just walk out right now tomorrow if they didn't like it, or B, when their term is up, they're no longer. So a lot of times, if you do get somebody in that organization that's really good at what they do and they have the skill sets and they leave, it's essentially a brain drain. You now lost all that ability. The other side of the coin, if you get somebody that doesn't have the skill sets and they're in a key position, then it's going to be to the detriment of the organization and a lot of tension. So I think what it boils down to is that unless you have some skin in the game and some ownership and some responsibility and accountability, and you're at the level of play, in many of these organizations, you'll see the governing bodies are layers away from the playing field, and rightly so, because they're so big. But what you set up, excuse me, is more of a vertical kind of a structure. What franchising does, it asks the person, and you screen the person. It's not just somebody walks up. Is this the right person to fit this business model? Because it's really going to be a strategic partnership. It's not going to be an employer-employee kind of relationship. It's like when someone signs up with one of my franchises, we're partners. We're there to work with each other. I've got things I have to do for them. They have things they have to do with me. They just happen to be more at the grassroots level. And I think that's what's key, is that they know their community better than I do. They're integrated in their networks in their community. They now have committed to owning the outputs of this franchise. And they've committed not only to their time, but they've financially put money up front. So now they're buying into it. And it's not a new model in sports. It's relatively new to the organized youth.
Sports, yeah. Absolutely.
But at the higher levels, when you go up into the amateur and the professional levels, it's all franchising.
It's a standard.
Absolutely. Now, granted, it's a little different, but it's the same premise.
Yeah. And on that, Anthony, how do you find the right franchise partners? Let's say, what qualities do you look for in someone who's going to carry forward your mission of Premier Sports Leagues?
Well, I guess there's two categories. One is the franchisee in general, and this pretty much applies to any franchise. Are they the type of person that has some kind of ability to get out and to communicate into their into their community? Can they get out and knock on doors, so to speak, metaphorically speaking, do some kind of sales ability, some kind of ability to go to network groups? Are they resilient? Are they, when things aren't working well, can they push through those? Things don't go their way. Do they have the ability to see the bigger picture, the vision? Do they have both that skill set of being a visionary, strategically looking at where they can take their business, but actually tactically getting involved with it in the day-to-day operations? Do they espouse leadership and delegation? Are they able to manage people the right way? So there's all these kind of skill sets are manifested in different ways just by what they do in their career, by some of the training they might have had. So when you're going through that initial kind of conversation, you're looking for what I'd say is the DNA of a franchisee. And that's not my term. I borrowed that from Angela Cote. She's a franchise trainer. Mm-hmm. And they're pretty much the same for every person that's going to go into a franchise business. So that's the business side. The particular side that we're on in the youth sports market is we want to look at somebody who has some or portrays some way of showing their value, showing what it means to understand the value, the long-term value of a business or of a sport. They've probably been there, they've probably coached, they probably have organized some events. Their children probably played in sports, just certain things that are sports related that we're looking to see where their mind is and where their heart posture is. Because, I can always train somebody on business, but I can't train anybody on the why, like why they're doing something, right? And so I can't get into necessary specifics because every interview that I would have with a franchisee is slightly different. But there are certain kind of things that I look for from both perspectives. One, from what their thoughts and possibly what their past actions were when they were involved with sports or essentially any event planning where there were kids.
Yeah.
And what values they see in that. And then where are their strengths or weaknesses in business?
Yeah. Yeah. How do you create that culture shift, making sports about life lessons rather than just the scoreboard?
Yeah, that's a big challenge. Because one of the things that the culture has taught us in organized youth sports right now is the default KPI, let me call it that, is your value is attached to the results, not to the effort. And I think if you're only measuring the results, then you're only going to measure that winning or losing. If you're not measuring or you're not at least acknowledging or working with the effort it takes to get there. And so that's extremely tough because when kids in particular come from other sports that have cultures of winning at all costs and they come into our sport, those cultures are brought in. And so it really takes a lot of great coaches and coach training and ongoing coach training, like regular coach training throughout the season, and even some training off season where coaches can start to learn more about development and not necessarily about just plays or play systems. So it's kind of a combination about, I always say, you plan always to win, but the purpose is not in just winning. And so when we have our coach training, we have to distinguish between the two. We have to let them know that if all you're measured on is your winning, then there's a very high probability that you're not going to meet the mark because you can't win 100% of the time. And so one of the things that we do build into our coach training, which when you think about it, some of these are just parents, they've never coached before or they've coached before. We have a 2 to 3 hour coach training program where we probably spend about a half hour actually on the game. And the hour and a half is spent on what a child wants from sports. What are the philosophies? What are the real goals, tangible life lesson goals? How are we going to teach them? A big thing is, as a coach, you have to understand a child is 10 years old. You're only one part of their journey. And so the whole idea as a coach is that your mandate is to help them develop themselves holistically as an athlete and just move them up to the next time another coach will take them over. So that by the time they exit the system, they're just better people overall. They're just more equipped for life. And the sport just happens to be the method or the tool that got them there. And so to create that culture, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of
Yeah.
sometimes undoing of things and redoing, but it's no different than parenting, Sid. It's one of those things that, you're going to have some things you need to teach your kids that are not going to be easy. And you're going to see some things you're going to teach your kid that you see the fruitfulness in it right away. It's a long journey. And that's the one thing that we tell our coaches. Yeah, sure. Go out, compete, play to win, but don't play to win at all costs. And that brings me to the definition of competition, which I think has been hijacked. I think in many youth sports organizations, the word competition is associated with winning and losing, right? You compete to win, or if you don't, then you're not very competitive, type of thing. When in actual fact, the word competition should be where you go out today and bring your best, and you try to draw the best out of the opponent that you're up against. And that's, to me, is what, and some days are going to be, you bring it and you got it, and your opponent is going to become better because of you. And other days your opponent is just not on their game, and you're just going to be a little better than them, or vice versa. So I think if we relook at that word competition and look at it as a perspective of not just winning, and attach it to that effort that you bring, and the effort is a result of what you do to produce that effort. Are you training? Are you practicing? Are you focusing? Or all the other things that come with making that effort a little bit better.
Yeah.
But also realizing that there's days you just can't, there's something going on in your life as a child, and we don't know that until the child gets there. And we just can't assume, and a parent can't assume that they want the best 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anthony, I have to ask you, managing a youth team, it's almost straightforward. I've done it for many years, developing youth development programs in various sports, and we pretty know what to do. But how do you deal with parents? How do you manage parents knowing that they are part of the community, but quite often we see some parents, some individuals, they go too far, they cross that line. How you deal with that, Anthony?
Yeah. Another tough question, Sid. I don't think there's a magic formula, because you're dealing with personalities, you're dealing with their behaviors, things that maybe they
Or
have.
what sort of rules do you do? Sorry to cut you, Anthony. What
No
sort
problem.
of discussion from day one you say, okay, this is what I'm gonna do, 1, 2, 3, 4. You guys, I want you to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and I do not want you to do whatever. So if you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, we have it's called a parent code of conduct. We start off right at the beginning, and we define what their code of conduct is. And so there's a clear message at the beginning, in writing, signed, no misunderstandings. And if they do cross the line, we now have an instrument, let's call it, a piece of paper with their signature, that we can now go back and discuss one of those code of conducts. And so it's not a personal slight. It's not a me against you. We're now taking the conversation back to this code of conduct. And to me, that's a super tool that if it gets to that level, that's your number one, your step one. Step two, essentially, is when decisions are made, we speak to the parents about having the child learn how to make decisions on their own. And that's critical. So if there's anything that's happening on the court with the child that I have to discipline the child, or the parent off the court, if it's a parent issue, we don't get the child involved, obviously. But if it's a child issue, we'll bring the child together with the parent and myself and one other person in our organization. And essentially, the whole focus there is not to have the parent put words in the child's mouth. The whole focus there is to have the child learn how to step up and make a decision, or make a choice, or let us know what they think, not what the parent has filtered through the parent's eyes and trying to tell us what they think, what they believe the child is telling us. So there's a couple of ways we do that there. There's a lot, like I said earlier, there's no one set, but with the proper tools and the proper kind of, I'll call it like meeting philosophy. This is what we're trying to do here. And I don't think we're any different than in many of the school systems. Like we happen to be in the sport, but there are a lot of things that we've drawn out of teachers in the education side of sport that we've utilized, because that problem still exists when you're in the classroom. And there's some things you just can't resolve. I mean, by the time you get to step 3, 4, or 5, because we do have kind of a step-by-step process that we train our franchisees, and sometimes it's just not a good partnership.
Yeah. You often mention planting a seed of a tree that you may never rest under. Can you explain what that means in the context of your work?
Yeah, all my other businesses that I've had previous to this one
Mhm.
have always been self-serving. What am I doing? What products am I selling? How much money am I going to make? What can I buy with that money? And if there's always an exit strategy. Hey, I built it this big. We'll flip it, sell it. This one has another kind of purpose for me. And so when I came across that quote, I thought it was very appropriate for what I'm building here. One of the things that sports has the ability to do is to have a generational impact. And so if we do our job correctly and if we perform our services and programs correctly, some of what we're going to instill upon those kids as 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years age, I won't see until I'm no longer here, that they're going to be life things. So what's important for me is that I plant that seed in good soil and I make sure that the thorns are weeded out and the seed is watered, so to speak. And so that by the time it's a little more mature and it exits my, let me call it my gardening, for sticking to the same kind of metaphor, my gardening skills,
Mhm.
it's now stronger and better and will grow. And I'll never see that in my lifetime. And so I've got to keep that in mind. That's something that I'm not looking for instant kind of gratification. I will see that from time to time when in the example that I said when we started this podcast. But
Yeah.
for the most part, the life values and life skills that I impart through my program will have a much more far-reaching impact. And so that's that's the
Yeah.
metaphor for the tree.
Yeah. Floorball and futsal aren't exactly household names within sports, at least not in North America.
No.
Yet you've managed to introduce these sports to kids who have maybe never heard of them. How do you get schools and communities on board with sports like floorball?
Yeah, that was always the challenge. When I first started out, I just knocked on doors. I just went to schools, made some phone calls, got in a gym, showed them this great sport. In this case, it was floorball, and got a little bit of traction. I think one of the things that I discovered early was that a big part of what I was doing was educating them first, giving them the ability to see, taste, before I could even move them on to one of my leagues. Nobody is going to sign up and give you $100 or a couple $100 on a sport they've never seen or felt or touched or whatever. A lot of it was just grassroots, door knocking, getting in some opportunities, getting some breaks. I had three, four, five people in the community who, some great people. One was the president of a minor hockey association. He embraced it, brought it into his hockey association, gave me the ability now to reach dozens of hockey teams for the off-ice cross-training programs. And a lady, Mary, she spearheaded kind of the school board junior sports programs.
Sports.
And so she only had 10 sports, and she actually got rid of hockey out of the junior high school and brought
Oh,
floorball in. Yeah,
okay.
big bold move here, but
What
I,
was the hook, Anthony, if I may
uh,
ask?
on that particular thing, what it was with that, because the way schools work, the whole idea behind school sports is that they're supposed to get kids who don't play sports or
Mm.
get them more
On.
engaged and then send them to the community. What was happening with hockey was that all the hockey players in school were just getting more hockey. Right? They were just getting to play hockey in the evening with their teams, and now they're getting to play. And I ref those games, so I know the difference between that AAA player in junior
Mm.
high and the house league player. The AAA player was dancing around them and just scoring goals at will, and it just wasn't a good environment. And so when she did it, it was brazen. I got to give her a lot of credit. Like she really took a lot of heat. And it just so happened about this time of year she made the
Mm.
decision. So she dubbed herself as the Grinch to stole junior high hockey. And but then she needed a replacement. I had gone into her school earlier. The concept that floorball was all inclusive. It was genderless. It was safe. It was easy. And she championed
Accessible.
accessible. So
Mm.
what she did is she found some funding for the schools where they can buy equipment. She had me go in and train a lot of their phys ed teachers, train the
Mhm.
trainers, and
Mhm.
subsequently we got into 65 schools in our school board. And then the next step was that they wanted to do a school jamboree, a weekend tournament. And so all those breaks, it's just you get a break every now and then. The breaks don't come unless you go and knock on the doors. But one of the errors I made at the beginning in the very first 2 years is I went in and did all these great exposures of sport. I attended some conferences with the phys ed teachers.
Mm-hmm.
It was all great, but I had nowhere for them to play. And so a lot of the hype and the excitement had just disappeared. And so by year number 3, I was like, boy, I'm losing everybody's getting excited about it, but I'm not fulfilling the back end of it. And that's when I realized that I had to step up and start creating some of these leagues.
Yeah, yeah. And within your model, beside of the support of schools, are there any kind of support, let's say, from the local authorities, local governments, or?
Not really, other than maybe some of the recreation facilities, the municipal recreation facilities. It took a long time for us to get some approval to play on
Yeah.
their gym floors. The misnomer was that, hey, it's ball hockey, it's floor hockey, they're going to beat the sticks up, the floors up, they're going to beat the walls up. So far from the truth, just because of the equipment and the lightweight of the ball.
Yeah.
Right? And so it took a lot of meetings, a lot of
Convincing.
constant emails.
Yeah.
And then finally, again, 1 or 2 facility managers who were brave enough to say, I really don't care what the policy is. I like your sport. Come on into my gym. So they gave us a few breaks. And then eventually it got, after about 5, 6 years, it got to where the decision makers of whether or not we can be endorsed to go into the facility schools started to see the light and essentially gave us the thumbs up to come in. But then that posed another problem, is that now we're accepted as one of the approved sports on the schools and the school floors and gyms. But now we're at the bottom of the list. There's 20 other sports ahead of us that are renting gym space, which to this day is still a challenge. But at the very least, we now have eliminated that. And we've taken it back to franchising. Like, here's one of the benefits of a franchisor or franchisee relationship. Some franchisee is going to run into these exact same problems when they open up in their community, and they're going to have to go that same path, the same learning curve,
So
the same phone calls. At the very least, being the franchisor, I can fast track that for them. I've got great letters from very expensive gyms here, that $1 million floors that they put in the university, essentially saying this won't do anything to the floors. And having those references to help a franchisee in the community will move them a lot quicker than it took me to move to get into these facilities. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And Anthony, from an investment point of view for the parents, can you give us a rough idea about an average, how much it would cost for a parent, let's say, to get their kids involved within the sports?
Yeah, we try to keep it in around $250, give or take. And I say give or take because that's really dependent on the number of games. If we play more games, obviously there's more cost to us, so it'll be more. But we try to stay around, because our spring typically is about an 8-week period. And so if we played a game a week, that's 8 games a season. If we play 2 games a week, that's 16 games a season. So somewhere in between, I'd say 150 on the low end to maybe 350 on the high end. And the reason I say 350 is because more games, but typically, depending on the venue, because we have to rent a venue, depend on the caliber. In some cases, for example, when we go into a dry pad, which essentially is a full-size 200 feet by 80-foot rink, and the ice has been removed, our sport doesn't play on that size. We're about 120 feet by 60 feet. So that means now we have to bring extra equipment in. We have to maybe train 2 referees because the length is greater than a small gym. When you get to that level, the price kind of goes up a little bit. But the where we started with our pricing is that there are a couple of charities here that parents can go and get kind of subsidy for
Get the
sport.
support, yeah.
One's called Jumpstart, Kids So we looked at what their maximum program is, and we said, okay, well, can we get it to where if their maximum contribution for one of these charities is $250, well, let's get our sport to where we pay they have the ability to pay 100%, right? And sometimes that doesn't work well for them, because if you get a sport that's $1,000, and then the single parent or the parents who can't afford sport only get $250, that's still another $750 they have to come up with. So we want to stay as affordable as possible, but also keeping in mind that if we're a franchisee, we are and should be able to create profit. We should be paid
Absolutely.
for our time. And again, another inherent benefit of privatizing the organized youth sports is that with those profits, we now have the ability to reinvest those into maybe better coach training, better facilities. And so the whole idea is not just to make profit and run out. And the whole idea is to make profit because you're a profitable business and you're running because now you'll sustain your business, because if you're not making
Absolutely.
profits,
Yeah,
you're not going to be around for the kids.
absolutely. And Anthony, since you started this journey, do you have an idea how many kids you've reached out to? How many kids they got involved within the sports?
I'd have to say, if I had an estimate, I'd say I'm well over getting involved and reaching out. Let's look at that as two different. I probably showcased floorball to well over 5,000 kids
Wow.
in the last say 5+ years. I probably have had about 500 kids come through our programs at one form or another, be it a minor hockey cross training program for an hour, a
And that's,
birthday.
sorry, 500 a year or?
No, 500 kids have registered for one of our
Okay,
sports
register.
program and played. So it might be just a 1 hour minor hockey cross training program. It might be a 1 hour birthday party with friends. On average, we have about 70 to 75 people that play in our leagues every year.
Okay.
So the whole idea right now is that we've got these kids that come back every spring to play, but now how do we grow that? And that's where I am with the business right now. And that's where a franchisee would be. And a lot of that growth is going to come from going back into the schools, doing partnerships with the schools, doing partnership with minor hockey associations. And what really is challenging, and it's still challenging to me today, is having the facility so that I can accommodate more people in the spring.
And how do you see what you're doing now with these sports evolving, let's say, the next 10 years?
I just think that there's a need right now for more variety in sports. I think because there are so many what we call low-profile sport, lesser-known sports that are all over the world. They're not just sports I created. I think people are starting to see those and starting to get more engaged with those, and schools are wanting them more. And so I see a growth in these low-profile sports. And so I think there's a great opportunity to bring these new sports either as an alternative to the other sports or a complement. So, for example, hockey is a great sport here in Canada, certainly. And what we run our sport after hockey, post-hockey. So it's a great opportunity for a child who finishes hockey, let's say middle of April, to still continue on playing a hockey type of sport at a lesser cost and less commitment, less travel and everything. So it kind of complements. They're still bringing their skill sets over type of thing. Our minor hockey cross training program during the hockey season is a great 1 hour off ice, so it complements it. So I think that a lot of these low profile emerging sports are great in and of themselves, but they're also great complements to the existing one. Futsal,
To
for
the
example,
existing one.
which
Yeah.
in Europe has been around since 1930,
Yeah. Yeah.
and many soccer organizations actually use futsal on a regular basis for their leagues and training. But that's a great complement sport to soccer and some of the other sports we have, wiffle ball, and they're great sports in and of themselves, but they're great complements. The best example I can say that where I think emerging sports are going to come is pickleball.
Yeah.
And little do people know that pickleball has been around since 1964 when three dads created the sport to keep their kids busy. And so for the longest time, it was a low profile sport and
Activity.
nobody
Yeah.
knew about it. And now look at it 5 years ago, now it's just booming. So
Right. Booming.
I just think that floorball and maybe futsal in North America, a re-emergence of wiffle ball, what a great little baseball, indoor baseball sport. Like, these are fun, easy to play, inexpensive, genderless, no specialized training. These are all kind of active sports that kids could easily play where they don't need any early development, right?
And as well, it's an opportunity for so many kids where they don't have, I would not say they don't have the talent it takes to be a good hockey player or a soccer player and things like that. Put it this way, they don't fit in those sports. And I think this emerging sports is a way out to keep them active and just having fun.
Yeah, it takes me all the way back to my childhood and the original conversation we had. I was a jack of all sports and a master of none. So when there's a baseball game going in the neighborhood, we grabbed our glove and ran over. I wasn't the best player, but I played. When there's a street hockey going, when there's a basketball game, pick up ball in one of the basketball courts, we just played. And, the whole idea, granted, they were popular sports, but I think a lot of that is missed now. I think it's so organized and so, tough for kids to get involved with some of these more mainstream sports that the parents in particular are now looking to, what are my alternatives?
Mm.
And if all we can be is just an alternative where we can get a child that doesn't play sports to actually come out and play, that's a win for us.
Yeah, yeah. Anthony, you are not just involved in sports, you also mentor business leaders. And I'm curious how you draw parallels between what happens on the field and what happens on the boardroom.
Well, the way I look at business is that it's interchangeable with sports and vice versa. There's things that you need to do in sport that can be translated to business. There's competition. There's your gameplay. There's your systems. There's a number of things, your skills, your training, your soft skill training, your sport specific training, which I'd call your product training versus your sales training. So there's a lot of things that if you played sports could very easily be used, those same soft and hard skills and operational practices can be brought into a business. So anytime that I'm speaking to any potential business owners or young business owners or anybody in that particular that's interested in business, I'll always draw upon a sports analogy, particularly if I find that common ground with them, if they played sports before. Because if you're going into business, you've never been in business, but you've played sports before, at the very least, by giving a sports analogy, you can at least have them relate to what that would be like or look like or feel like when they go into their business. And so that's essentially the kind of the broader kind of the way. But then, of course, there's hundreds of little details within the business that, you can work with them and train them to go a little further. And but the same thing, like even from a higher perspective, like, why are you in business? When I first started business, it was a money grab. It was me wanting to get rich quick. I was 25 years old. I bought a franchise. 7 or 8 of my high school buddies all bought the same franchise. So it was just, but as you get further and further up the chain of business, you start realizing that business should serve a greater good. And I mean a greater good. It's more than what you are. It's not your business shouldn't define you. The impact in your business should be lasting. Whether it's a little product or it has a major impact on society, and it should have a positive impact. And so
Absolutely.
that's kind of where I bring my coaching and business kind of mentoring using my sports business as an example.
Yeah. Great. I think it's time for our lightning round.
All right.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Let's do this.
All right.
Favorite sport growing up?
No question, hockey. I mean, you grew up north. You have one TV station where I grew up when I grew up. Saturday night was hockey night. And then one other night of the week was hockey. And I was all in on hockey. Like, my family didn't have a car, so I put the hockey bag over my shoulder and I walked up 2 or 3 miles in the snow to play hockey. So I was all in hockey. Now, it's my favorite, but I also played basketball at the high school. So I played other sports as well, but hockey by far.
Yeah. What was your favorite hockey team where you were young?
When I was young, my favorite was the Pittsburgh Penguins. I don't know why. I bought a patch to sew onto my jacket, and it was a really cool looking penguin with a hockey stick. And I remember that, and I don't know why, because I would never see a Pittsburgh hockey game. And it might be that my team was called the Penguins for all I know, but we would only get the Montreal or the Toronto hockey game. So I have no idea why that, but eventually I kind of start watching more and more hockey, and it became the Vancouver Canucks, and then eventually it became the Quebec Nordiques. So yeah.
Great. Who is your biggest mentor?
I got to say, and it's a little cliche, but I got to say it's my dad. He wasn't a business owner. He was a laborer. Matter of fact, he was not on the highest part of the labor pool. He was a truck driver in the mines. But you know what? Like, some of the things that we didn't have cars, so we weren't poor by no means, because when you're living up north, everybody makes decent wages. But relative to everybody there, we didn't have the skidoos. We didn't have all the things, But one thing that he did is that he made a point every year of saving his money so we could go on vacation. And that vacation typically was to go see our cousins in Nova Scotia. And sometimes he couldn't go. because it just wasn't affordable. But
Yeah.
he gave us that vacation every year. He instilled our faith in us. He instilled a lot of values and principles into us. If I had a bad day or I messed up somewhere, it wasn't so much about how to fix it.
Mm.
It was more a mindset of, okay, what's the impact here and how can we learn from this and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And my dad was a little older when I was coming of age. Like he was 43 when I was born. So by the time I was hitting 13, he was staring down retirement. So I always said I grew up with a great dad who had somewhat of a grandfather wisdom. And I got the better of that. And I think that's who shaped me and molded me to who I am. So I've got to give him the credit as my mentor.
Great. Great. Coffee or tea?
Tea, no question. 4 or 5 a day. Orange Pico,
Yeah.
well, yeah, without a doubt. Matter of fact, we have a brand over here called Tim Hortons. If you go through the drive-through and I order a tea and I get about 4 kilometers down the road and I open it up and it's a coffee, I go back. I'm not drinking it.
Great. Most memorable sports moment as a kid?
Oh my gosh. That's a tough one, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of little ones. Oh my gosh, I've got to say, probably the most memorable one. It's a real tough one. I've got 4 or 5 little tiny ones, but I'll give you one nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I got the call to play the center on our high school basketball team, right? I think that was because, I picked up basketball late. I actually, because I found it extremely difficult to go to hockey, because again, you have to understand, we've got minus 55, we got 3 feet of snow, I'm walking 2 kilometers. When basketball came along, it was just after school, it was easy. And I just picked up the sport. And then I think when I finally got to the level where I felt I achieved something is when I got the starting call to jump the ball. And I'm not saying there are many who like that, but that one there I remember, and as I do remember a couple other ones. But I think that just knowing that the practices and efforts, that there was some kind of recognition, and that recognition came in from a position. And as you can tell, it didn't come in from winning a cup and not that there's anything wrong with that. We won a couple of tournaments and stuff like that. But to me, it was just a personal best that I remember most.
Great. What's a book you think everyone should read?
I think if you're in business, you have to read The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. It was the turning point for me from being on the tools out there. And my very first business was a carpet cleaning business. And I was the greatest carpet cleaner on earth. You know what I mean? That's, I'd solve all the problems. That stain, I'm getting that stain out, right? However, I wasn't building a business. And so when I read Michael's book on systems, moving from that technician guy to the manager to the entrepreneur, working on your business, not necessarily always in your business, these were big mind shift changes. If somebody's going to read a book on business, I think that's foundational reading.
Yeah. One skill you think every young athlete should learn?
I think it's a mind skill, maybe a heart posture skill. I think there's so many things you can gain out of, but I think the one thing, if you're going to excel in life and better yourself in sports, you need to be able to push through things. You need to be adaptable and resilient. And so all those things come from perseverance, come from a positive kind of, you have to think that you can do something before you can do it. Not that because you think it's going to happen, but unless you have that mindset of resilience, grit, I guess you want to call it, that's the things that are going to get you through, not only in sport, but they're going to get you through in life as well, because you're going to need that when times get tough.
Dream travel destination?
I would have to say I'd like to go back to Scotland. Now, ask my wife, she wants to go south, right?
Yeah, you want to go north to the cold?
Yeah, I want to go north. And the only reason is I've been there before 25 years ago in the middle of winter, mind you.
Yeah.
But I'm a McNeil. My roots are in Scotland. I want to go back and just recharge, right? There's tons of destinations. There's tons of great,
Scotland is beautiful. It's stunning.
Yeah. And I want to go back, not in the wintertime this time. I want to go back in the summertime. And I'm not so much, I've done a lot of the up north because my roots of my namesake is from the Isle of Barra. But that was almost 30 years ago now. And so I want to go back and just get back to my roots and smell the air and taste the haggis.
Yeah. Anthony, if you could have a dinner with a historical figure, who will it be and why?
No question, it would be Jesus Christ. I'm a Christian. I have strong faith. I just think he's the best. And I'd want to be there with him to meet him in person in the world. I believe I'm going to meet him in person after this world, but I'd want to be around the times just to see how I'd almost want it and not want it, to be honest with you. You know what I mean? Like, careful what you ask for, right? Because you know what, I'm so distanced from that time that I think I lack appreciation for what he did. Just to go against the authorities, to single out on his movement, right? The way, as they call it. Just what he had to persevere as a human being for a greater good. You know what I mean? What I feel is a greater good. Lots of arguments about religion, the organization religion, and how that the organization itself has done a lot of harm over the centuries. But from the heart perspective of doing good and being righteous, he's obviously, in my opinion, the epitome of that. And I think that part of maybe my business journey and part of who I am in wanting to do things to right and have lasting impact and create a movement that in my small kind of section of the world, in this case in sports, it might be founded, if not is founded on what he did in his movement.
Yeah. What's the worst career advice you ever gotten?
Chase the money. Yeah. A lot of people would say there's a better job out here. It pays more. You're not going to advance if you don't do this, if you don't do that. And understand, this is when I say career, I'm more talking about jobs and career, because at 25, I left an engineering job and started cleaning carpets and subsequently have bought and sold a few businesses. But I've got to say the root of all the career before that and what I've done while I was in business is putting that money as my main focus. And I think that when I realized that, yeah, don't get me wrong, money is necessary and it's important and it solves a few headaches. But I think when someone was trying to convince me that I need to take this business opportunity because of the lure of the money, and you hear it all the time, the multi-level marketing and all the get-rich-quick schemes, it's all focused on money, and it just didn't pan out. Every time I chased the money, it didn't pan out the way I wanted to. Not necessarily in getting the money. There was a lot of things that I missed in that process.
And finally, if you have to give an advice or a piece of wisdom to our listeners on any topic.
I want to take it back to that quote, to be honest with you, Sid. Plant a tree that someday you may never get the luxury of sitting underneath them. I think everything you do, say, how you act, has a lasting impact. And think about that. Think about that in your business. Think about that in your family. Think about that in your relationships. Not saying you have to be perfect, but just think that what you're doing is either enriching and helping someone to grow, or it's not. And I think that we can keep that in mind. It's something again, the quote I live by is more to do with business, but it's also a quote that could pertain to life as well.
Great. And on that, Anthony McNeil, thank you so much for joining us today. Your work reminds us why community, passion, and purpose are so crucial in sports, especially for our kids. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Sid. I really appreciate it. This was a great time.
For our listeners, if you want to learn more about Anthony and Premier Sports League, head over to www.premiersportsleagues.com. Again, premiersportsleagues.com. I leave you with this quote from soccer legend Mia Hamm. Sports can do much. It gives us confidence, self-respect, discipline, and the ability to set and accomplish goals. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's conversation with Anthony, please subscribe, share, and leave us a review. I'm Sid Bensalah, and this is Pre-Zero Sports Talk. Until next time, bye-bye.